Sunlight streamed through the blinds, leaving a striped pattern on the floor. I can't remember when I stopped opening the curtains completely, probably after Janice passed away. The light now seemed too harsh, unnecessarily bright. In a house where her laughter was no longer heard, even the sun's rays seemed like uninvited guests. I slowly got up from the chair where I had spent the last 3 hours looking through old photo albums. My knees responded with their usual pain. My 72 years were increasingly making themselves felt. Today was the 5th anniversary of her death. It had been 5 years since I had been living alone in this house, which we had bought together almost 4 decades ago in the quiet suburb of Tigard. Our house had always been spacious for two, but now it seemed immense for one. 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and memories everywhere. Photos on the walls, souvenirs from trips, her collection of porcelain figurines, which I never brought myself to put away. In the southeast corner of the living room stood an oak secretary desk, my miniature office. This is where I kept the folders with documents that I couldn't leave at the office when I retired. After the funeral, Mrs. Coleman brought me casseroles and pies for almost a month, until I told her I could manage on my own. Since then, we had only exchanged polite greetings when we met. The kitchen was clean and tidy. After so many years of living alone, I had learned to keep the house in a state of sterility that frightened the rare guests. Neatly arranged jars of spices, even stacks of plates, a spotless sink. Janice, among the dozens of folders, a thin file labeled Elma Rand, Cable, my sister-in-law, held a special place. She was the woman who had gradually distanced my only son from me. Quentin had met her 10 years ago, when she had just arrived from Eastern Europe on a student visa. She was bright, ambitious, and had an accent that he found charming. The wedding was modest and hasty. I remember she worked without official permission in their family business, organizing corporate events, and missed mandatory checks. These were minor issues that were usually overlooked, given the length of the marriage and the fact that Quentin was a citizen. But formally, they were violations. I warned my son about these risks. I explained that such negligence could lead to problems when renewing his residence permit or obtaining citizenship. Quentin took my words as an attempt to control their lives, as a manifestation of prejudice against foreigners. The irony was that in 30 years of service, I had helped hundreds of immigrants legalize their status, find loopholes in confusing legislation, and reunite with their families. Since then, our relationship with our son has been strained. Quentin called less and less often and only came to visit on major holidays. And after Janice's death, visits were reduced to just 1 or 2 a year. Elma became a master of excuses. The children were sick, business matters, another renovation. I saw my grandchildren, Hazel and Ted, so rarely that they seemed embarrassed to call me Grandpa. I took a sip of coffee and opened the folder. It contained copies of all of Alma's documents, her visa, marriage certificate, applications for status renewal, even receipts for payment of fees. At the same time, I kept a record of any violations I noticed, an old habit of documenting anything that seemed suspicious. Not to use against my daughter-in-law, but rather out of professional perfectionism and perhaps concern for my son. If problems arose, these records could help. A phone call broke the silence in the house. I glanced at the screen. Rod Harlow, my former deputy and one of the few colleagues I had kept in touch with since retiring. "Perry, old sea dog, how's it going?" His cheerful voice sounded unnaturally loud in the silence of my home. "Taking it easy, Rod. What's up? You don't usually call on weekends." "Heard the news? Bradley retired and Fenton was appointed to replace him." I frowned. James Fenton was known for his tough approach to immigration law. We had met several times at conferences, and he always struck me as someone who saw the letter of the law, but not its spirit. "How is he doing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He started a real witch hunt. He's initiated a review of all cases from the last 15 years, especially those with the slightest violations of residency requirements. He says he wants to clean up the system and get rid of the dead souls in the database." I felt my heart sink. 15 years is exactly the period when Elma came to the country. "Does he have a list of specific cases?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound casual. Rod snorted. "You know I have eyes and ears everywhere. The first batch of cases has already been selected for review, about 100. And you know what? Your sister-in-law's on that list. I gripped the phone tighter. Are you sure? Absolutely. Elma Rand, who obtained citizenship through marriage to Quentin Campbell, your son. The case is flagged because she missed 2 mandatory interviews and worked without a permit between 2020 and 2022. This is exactly what I warned Quentin about. Typical negligence that usually goes unpunished, but not with a boss like Fenton. When will the checks begin? I asked, already considering my options. The first notifications will be sent out in a week. I think yours will arrive next Tuesday or Wednesday. I was silent, thinking about the situation. Despite our strained relationship, I couldn't let Quentin and his family face immigration problems, especially because of the violations I had warned him about. Rod, I need a favor. He laughed. I thought so. What do you want? Can you postpone the inspection of Elma? At least for a month until I talk to Quentin. Perry, do you understand what you're asking? Fenton personally reviews all postponements. Tell him the case requires additional documentation. Use my Protocol 97. Fenton is new enough not to know all our old procedures. Protocol 97 was a bureaucratic trick I had created many years ago. It allowed a case to be delayed under the pretext of requesting additional documents from the National Security Archives, a process that never took less than a month. Rod sighed. All right, old friend. I'll do it for you, but only for a month, no more. And you'll have to deal with your sister-in-law yourself. Thanks, Rod. I owe you one. You owe me big time. You owe me a bottle of that scotch you brought back from your trip to Edinburgh. After the conversation, I sat for a long time looking at the folder with Elma's documents. Now I had to decide how to use this information. Should I warn Quentin and Elma, help them prepare for the audit, or use the situation to finally dot the I's and cross the T's in our relationship? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an incoming message on my phone. The text was from Quentin, which was rare in itself. Hi, Dad. We want to invite you to a birthday party next Saturday. It will just be us, the kids, and you. Nothing fancy, just a family dinner. Let us know if you can make it. I reread the message several times. Quentin hadn't wished me a happy birthday for 2 years in a row, limiting himself to a formal card that I was sure Elma had chosen and signed. And suddenly an invitation like this, just after their case had been put on the list for review. Coincidence? Hardly. Over the years working in immigration, I had stopped believing in coincidences. Perhaps they already knew about the audit? Or had Elma, with her connections among immigrants, heard about Fenton's new policy and become concerned? In any case, it was a chance to talk to my son face to face, to warn him about the impending problems. A chance, perhaps, to repair our relationship. 72 is the age when you start to think about what you will leave behind. And the rift with my only son was my most painful regret. I typed a short reply. Thanks for the invitation. I'd love to come. My finger hovered over the send button for a moment. I wasn't sure I really would love to come. My last meetings with Quentin and Elma had been tense, filled with awkward silences and forced conversations about the weather. But I pressed send anyway. Returning to the secretary's office, I noticed a photo on the wall. Quentin in his graduation gown, Janice and I on either side of him, all smiling. Back then, we were still a real family. Before Alma came along, before Janice died, before all these years of mutual alienation. I closed the folder with the documents and carefully put it back in its place. The upcoming visit required preparation, and not just emotional preparation. I had to decide how much to tell Quentin about the audit. Should I warn him, give him time to prepare, or use this information as leverage if the situation required it? My gaze fell on the photo of Janice on the bedside table. She always knew how to reconcile Quentin and me, how to find compromises. What would you do in my place? I whispered, even though I knew the answer. Janice always chose family, always protected our loved ones, even when they were wrong. I decided to act according to the circumstances. I would go to the birthday party, see what the atmosphere was like, how they behaved, and then I would decide whether to reveal my cards or whether it would be better to help them secretly, as I had done all these years. Looking out the window, I saw that the clouds had thickened and it was about to rain. The weather in Thai Guard had always been changeable, especially at this time of year. Just like my life, I thought, which was once again preparing to throw me a curveball. The week leading up to the birthday dragged on slowly. I tried to keep myself busy with my usual activities, reading historical novels, watching documentaries about World War II, walking around the neighborhood. But my thoughts kept returning to the upcoming meeting with my son and his family. And of course, to that conversation 10 years ago that marked the beginning of our estrangement. Quentin brought Elma to our house for Thanksgiving. She was as bright as an exotic bird in our modest surroundings, tall, slender, with long red hair and bright red lipstick. She spoke loudly with a strong accent, laughing at every joke Quentin made. I noticed Janice raise an eyebrow, our family sign of surprise, when Elma called herself a future American. She's on a student visa, Quentin explained, studying business administration. I nodded, hiding my professional interest. A student visa is a common first step for those who want to stay in the country. It's legal but requires compliance with many conditions. Where are you staying, Elma? I asked between the second and third glasses of wine. With a friend on campus, she replied, but I'll be moving in with Quentin soon. That was the first red flag. Foreign students are required to live on campus or in registered housing. Does your university know about this? I asked. Dad, Quentin interjected, it's just a formality. Everyone does it. Formalities in immigration law matter, son, I replied, not suspecting that this conversation would become a template for all our future conflicts. 3 months later, they announced their engagement. Another month later, they got married, a modest ceremony at the city hall, without a lavish celebration. Janice cried, but not only out of happiness. It's too soon, she whispered to me. They hardly know each other. I knew that many foreigners use marriage to obtain citizenship. It was a legal route, if the relationship was genuine. But my professional suspicion made me doubt. I conducted an unofficial check on Elma. Nothing serious, just a basic query in the system. Everything was clean, her visa was valid, and there were no violations of her resident status at that time. I calmed down, deciding that my suspicion was simply the result of many years of working with violators of immigration law. After all, Quentin was an adult, capable of making his own decisions. The problems began a year later. Quentin and Elma started a small business organizing corporate events. Nothing special. Planning parties, team building, corporate events. Elma was the heart and soul of the company. She communicated with clients, conducted negotiations, and drew up estimates. Quentin was in charge of the technical side, sound, lighting, decorations. Once, while looking through their advertising brochure, I noticed that Elma was listed as a co-founder and creative director. That was the second warning sign. At that time, she only had a temporary residence permit, which did not give her the right to own a business or work without special permission. I invited my son to lunch, without Elma, and tried to explain the situation. Quentin, I'm glad things are going well for you, but Elma can't officially work for your company without a work permit. My son dismissed my concern. Dad, everyone does it. She's my wife, and it's our business. The law doesn't make exceptions for married couples, I argued. If her status is checked, there could be problems. We have nothing to fear, Quentin replied with the confidence of someone who had never dealt with immigration bureaucracy. We're not breaking any rules. Technically, you're violating at least 3 points of the immigration code, I began to list, but Quentin interrupted me. Listen, I know you're worried, but Elma and I have thought everything through. In a couple of years, she'll get her citizenship, and all these formalities won't matter anymore. I wanted to explain to him that it was precisely these formalities that could become an obstacle to obtaining citizenship, but he wasn't listening anymore. This conversation was repeated with variations several times over the next few years. Every time I brought up the subject of Elma's documents, Quentin took it as an attempt to control him or a sign of mistrust. Gradually, he began to distance himself. His visits became less frequent, his phone calls shorter. Elma increasingly found excuses not to come to our house for the holidays. When Hazel, our first granddaughter, was born, I hoped that our relationship would improve. I helped delay the check using my connections, but warned Quentin that such carelessness could cost him dearly. He accused me of intimidation. You just don't want her to become a full member of this family in this country, he said at the time. Janice tried to smooth things over, explaining to her son that I just wanted to protect them. But he already saw me as the enemy and Elma as the victim of my supposed prejudice. When Janice fell ill, the situation temporarily improved. Quentin came more often, helped with her treatment, and supported me. Elma was also there, although I felt that her concern for Janice was more a matter of politeness than sincere feeling. After Janice's death, my son and I finally went our separate ways. He immersed himself in work, and I in loneliness. We maintained the appearance of a relationship, holiday greetings, occasional phone calls, even more occasional visits. But there was no real closeness anymore. And now, 5 years after my wife's death, I was driving to the cemetery to talk to her about our son and his problems. It was an old habit that helped me cope with loneliness. The Eternal Rest Cemetery was located on the outskirts of Tigard, among hills covered with pine trees. It was a quiet, well-kept place where each grave looked like a part of a harmonious landscape. Janice had chosen it herself when she was still healthy. "It's beautiful here," she said at the time, "and quiet. You'll enjoy coming here." I parked my car at the entrance and slowly walked along the familiar path. Janice's grave was on a small hill under an old oak tree. A simple granite stone with her name, dates of birth and death, and a short phrase, "Love remains." "Hello, dear," I said, sitting down on a bench next to the grave. "I'm sorry I didn't bring flowers. I know you love lilies, but I was in a hurry." I paused, gathering my thoughts. Talking to Janice always helped me figure out difficult situations, even now that she couldn't respond. Quentin invited me to his birthday party. Strange, isn't it? After so many years of coldness. I think it's because Elma is on the list for inspection. You would say I'm too suspicious, and maybe you're right, but the coincidence is too obvious. The wind rustled the oak leaves as if Janice was trying to say something. "I know you would want me to help them. Despite everything, Quentin is our son, and I will help, of course. I've already arranged a postponement with Rod, but I don't know if I should tell them about it right away. Maybe I should find out why they really invited me first." I imagined Janice shaking her head, disapproving of my manipulations. "You're right, as always, I have to be honest. But what if they're using me? What if this is all just so I can cover up their mistakes again, and then they disappear from my life for months?" The silence of the cemetery was the only answer. I sighed. "Okay, I'll try to be fair. I'll tell them about the inspection and help them prepare. But this time, they'll have to listen to my advice. No excuses, no disregard for formalities. Elma will have to get her documents in order if she wants to stay in the country." I sat there for a few more minutes, staring at the monument. Then I got up and touched the cool granite. "I miss you, Janice. Every day." On the way home, I decided to stop by the Greenfield supermarket to buy something for tea. Her birthday was in 3 days, and I wanted to be ready. I already had a gift, antique cufflinks that I had bought a month ago when I saw them in a jewelry store. They reminded me of my father's cufflinks, which Quentin had always wanted to inherit, but which had been lost during a move many years ago. I was methodically selecting products at the supermarket when I heard a familiar voice. Perry Campbell. What a coincidence. I turned around and saw Sheila Brooke, a petite woman with short gray hair and a sharp, attentive gaze. We had worked together for almost 15 years. She was the head of the document verification department. After I retired, we occasionally met at official immigration service events. "Sheila, it's good to see you." I smiled, genuinely pleased to see my old colleague. "How are you, old bureaucrat?" She had always been straightforward, which I appreciated. "I hear you're a recluse now." "Not exactly a recluse, just someone who values peace and quiet," I replied. "And you? Still chasing fake passports?" "Not anymore. I retired last year," she said, taking a packet of pasta from the shelf and putting it in her basket. "But I've kept some connections. For example, I know that your former protege, Rod Harlow, is now the new boss's deputy." "Yes, he mentioned it," I said, trying to sound uninterested. "And I've also heard," Sheila lowered her voice, "that there's going to be a big purge. Fenton has decided to review all cases from recent years, especially those involving violations of residency requirements." I tensed up. Sheila was always well informed, sometimes even better than the current employees. "Yes, I've heard something like that. Be careful, Perry." She looked me straight in the eye. "Fenton is not one to do favors for former colleagues. If you know anyone with immigration issues, they'd better get their affairs in order. And quickly." I realized she knew about Elma. Sheila always knew more than she let on. "Thanks for the warning," I said sincerely. "I'll pass it on to the right people." "Do that," she patted me on the shoulder. And come over for tea sometime. I've moved to Maple Street, number 36. I have an excellent whiskey collection that no one can appreciate. I'll be sure to stop by, I promised. We said goodbye, and I continued shopping, but my thoughts were already far away. Sheila's warning confirmed the seriousness of the situation. If even retirees knew about the upcoming inspections, the rumors had surely reached the immigrant communities. Perhaps Elma already knew, and that was why she and Quentin had decided to restore their relationship with me. I spent the next few days in doubt and reflection. Part of me wanted to call Quentin immediately, warn him about the inspection, and offer my help. Another part insisted on caution. Too many times my attempts to help had been perceived as interference. I decided to wait until their birthday, observe their behavior, and then make a decision. On Saturday, I carefully prepared for the visit. I put on my best tweed jacket, a gift from Janice on our last anniversary. I styled my hair and trimmed my beard. I put the gift in a bottle of good whiskey in the trunk of my car and set off. Quentin and Elma lived in a new neighborhood in Tigard, built up with identical two-story houses with small, neat lawns. Their house stood out with its bright blue front door and flower bed with exotic flowers. Elma's passion for bright colors was evident in everything. I parked on the driveway next to their minivan and sat for a few minutes, gathering my courage. My last visit had been almost 6 months ago at Christmas and had ended in awkward silence after Elma had commented on my outdated views on parenting. Finally, I picked up the gift, the bottle, and headed for the door. Before I could knock, the door swung open and Quentin appeared on the threshold, tall with a receding hairline and thin-rimmed glasses, so much like me in my youth that my heart sank. "Dad?" His smile seemed strained. "You're right on time, as always." "Happy birthday, son." I handed him the gift and the bottle. "Thanks, you shouldn't have." Hunter, he glanced at the bottle of whiskey. "Macallan, 18 years old? Wow, that's your favorite. I thought we could have a drink together," I said, walking into the house. The living room was immaculately tidy. Elma's work, no doubt. Every surface gleamed, every pillow on the sofa was fluffed and arranged at a precise angle. On the walls were professional family photos in matching frames. I noticed that I wasn't in any of them, just Quentin, Elma, and the kids. Elma emerged from the kitchen as slender as ever, her red hair pulled back into an elaborate style, her makeup flawless. She was wearing an elegant burgundy dress, which I was sure was quite expensive. "Perry," she nodded with a polite smile, making no attempt to hug or shake hands. "I'm so glad you could come. The children will be happy to see their grandfather." There was a false note in her voice that I had learned to recognize over years of working with people who hid their true intentions. Elma was not happy about my arrival, but she diligently played the role of the hospitable daughter-in-law. "Where are my grandchildren?" I asked, looking around. "In their rooms," Quentin replied. "Hazel, Ted, come down. Grandpa's here." There was a patter of footsteps upstairs, and soon the children appeared on the stairs. Hazel, 9 years old, with long red hair like her mother's, but with my gray eyes. And Ted, 6 years old, a carbon copy of Quentin as a child. The same stubborn chin, the same curious brown eyes. They came down and stopped a few steps away from me, clearly not knowing how to behave. I dropped to one knee to be at their eye level. "Hello, kids. You've grown so much since we last met." Hazel nodded without looking up. "Hello, Grandpa." Ted, more outgoing, stepped closer. "Did you bring presents?" "Ted," Elma scolded him. "Don't talk like that." "It's okay," I smiled and took 2 small boxes out of my pocket. "Of course I did. For my favorite grandchildren." The children carefully took the gifts. Hazel received a silver brooch in the shape of a fox. Janice collected such brooches, and I thought my granddaughter would like this family tradition. I gave Ted a folding pocket knife with a wooden handle. Safe for a child his age, but a real one. "A knife?" Elma frowned. "He's too young for that, Perry." "I had one at his age," I replied. "So did Quentin." My son nodded with a slight smile. "The first genuine one of the evening?" "Yes, I remember. You taught me how to carve figures out of wood." "It doesn't matter," Elma insisted. "Times are different now. Ted, give the knife to your dad. He'll keep it until you're old enough." The boy reluctantly handed the knife to his father. I felt a pang of irritation, but said nothing. This was no time for conflict. "Come into the dining room." Elma pointed to the door on the left. "Lunch is almost ready." Quentin, show your father where he can wash his hands. My son led me through the living room to a small bathroom. I'm sorry about that, he said quietly when we were alone. Elma is very concerned about the children's safety. I understand, I replied, although I didn't really understand this excessive protectiveness. How are you doing? Is business booming? Quentin hesitated. Overall, it's good. There are some difficulties, but we're managing. I sensed the tension in his voice, but decided not to press the issue. All in good time. When we returned to the dining room, the table was already set. A perfectly ironed tablecloth, impeccably arranged cutlery, fresh flowers in the center of the table. Elma always loved to impress. Sit down, Perry, she said, pointing to the seat opposite Quentin. We're having a family dinner tonight. I sat down, feeling the atmosphere in the room becoming increasingly tense. The children fell silent. Quentin tapped his fingers nervously on the table, and Elma bustled about, arranging the dishes. It looks delicious, I said when she put the roast chicken on the table. You've always been an excellent hostess. Thank you, she replied with a forced smile. I hope you enjoy it. Dinner began, filled with awkward pauses and formal conversation about the weather, the children's school, and new neighbors. I sensed that there was more to this mundane conversation, that Quentin and Elma wanted to say something, but were waiting for the right moment. It was only after dessert, a magnificent chocolate cake that I was sure had been bought at a bakery and not made by Alma, that Quentin cleared his throat and said, Dad, we're very happy you came today. We have a special gift for you. I tensed, preparing for anything. We have a special gift for you, Quentin repeated, exchanging a quick glance with Alma. She got up from the table and left the room, returning a few seconds later with a large box wrapped in blue gift paper with a gold bow. The box was about 30 by 40 centimeters, quite heavy, judging by the way Elma was holding it. Happy birthday, Perry, she said, placing the box on the table in front of me. I looked at the box, then at their faces. Quentin looked tense, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Elma, on the other hand, was barely holding back a smile, but not the warm smile that close people exchange. It was a smile of anticipation, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. The children watched with curiosity. Hazel, the more sensitive of the two, seemed concerned, as if she understood that something was wrong. Ted was just happy to be at the center of some adult activity. Thank you, I said, carefully accepting the box. Don't worry about it. Oh, it's no trouble, replied Elma. We've been planning to give you this gift for a long time. Open it. Don't keep us in suspense. I began to carefully unwrap the paper, as I had been accustomed to doing since childhood, when gifts were rare and every piece of wrapping paper was saved for reuse. Go ahead. I slowly looked up, meeting Quentin's gaze, then Elma's. They looked at me expectantly, like theater-goers waiting for the climax of a performance. That's an interesting joke, I said, trying to remain calm. Elma laughed, no longer hiding her amusement. It's not a joke, Perry. We paid the deposit and the first month's rent. Take a closer look at the box. I looked down and noticed that there were documents under the brochures. I pulled them out and saw a contract for residence at the Sunny Harbor Nursing Home. My name was already filled in on the form. All that was left was to sign it. We thought you'd be better off there, Elma continued, ignoring my stony face. They have everything you need. Medical care, entertainment, socializing with people your own age. And we'll have peace of mind knowing that you're being cared for by professionals. Elma's right, Dad, Quentin interjected. His voice sounded uncertain, but he continued. At your age, it's dangerous to live alone. And there, you'll be under supervision. My age? I asked quietly. I'm 72, Quentin. I'm fully capable and healthy. Right now, yes, Elma nodded. But no one knows what will happen in a year or two. It's better to decide this in advance, while you can still participate in the decision-making process. Her words sounded reasonable, but her tone was condescending, as if she were talking to a child or someone who was no longer capable of understanding their own interests. Did you discuss this with me? Did you ask my opinion? I addressed Quentin, but Elma replied, We knew you would be stubborn. All old people resist at first, but then they get used to it and even thank us. All old people, I repeated, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. And how many old people do you know, Elma? Enough, she shrugged. My friends' parents, clients of our business. They all eventually admit that a nursing home is the best option. Quentin looked increasingly uncomfortable. But he didn't stop his wife. He looked at Dad, Quentin began, but Elma interrupted him. Yes, Perry, if you want to know the truth, you're a burden with your old-fashioned views, your criticism of our decisions, your constant I know better. Old people belong in nursing homes, not in the affairs of young families. Her words hung in the air like a slap in the face. Ted and Hazel stared at their mother with wide eyes, clearly shocked by her tone. Elma, Quentin snapped at her. The children? Let them hear, she cut him off. They need to understand how the world works too. Older people should know their place and not interfere with the lives of young people. She turned to me with a triumphant look. Sunny Harbor's a great place, Perry. You'll be fine there. And if not, well, at least you'll be far away from us and won't be able to constantly remind us that we're doing something wrong. I looked at her, and suddenly everything fell into place. That's why they invited me here right now. Not because of Elma's documents, but because they had found a way to finally push me out of their lives. Under the guise of caring, they wanted to get rid of an inconvenient old man. Quentin and Elma watched my reaction. She was defiant. He was increasingly uncomfortable. They were clearly expecting protests, maybe even an outburst of anger, something that would confirm their perception of me as a difficult, stubborn old man. But during my many years working in immigration, I had learned to keep my emotions under control, even in the most stressful situations. I took a deep breath and looked at the children. Hazel, Ted, could you go upstairs and play? We adults need to talk in private. The children jumped up from the table with relief and quickly disappeared up the stairs to the second floor. When their footsteps faded away, I turned to Elma and Quentin, keeping my voice calm. You know, I'm not surprised by this gift. I felt for a long time that you wanted to get rid of me, but the timing is interesting. Quentin tensed up. What do you mean? I mean that you decided to give me a nursing home right now, when the Immigration Service is starting a large-scale document check. Elma turned pale but quickly regained her composure. I have no idea what you're talking about. Really? I smiled, taking out my phone. Then you'll be interested to know that last week I spoke to Rod Harlow, my former deputy, who now works under the new head of the Immigration Service, James Fenton. I noticed Elma flinch involuntarily at the mention of that name, so she did know after all. Fenton has initiated a review of all cases from the last 15 years, I continued, especially those involving violations of residency requirements. And you know what? Your case, Elma, was in the first batch to be reviewed. Now Quentin turned pale. What? Why didn't you tell us before? When should I have told you? I asked calmly. During the 6 months we didn't see each other? Or maybe when you gave me that gift with a hint to get lost? Elma began tapping her fingernails nervously on the table. This is a bluff. You're trying to scare us. You think so? I smiled again. Let's check it out. Remember how in 2020 you worked without permission in your business? Or how you missed 2 mandatory interviews to renew your status in 2021? Her face froze, confirming my words. How did you? I worked in immigration for 30 years, Elma. Do you think I didn't notice the violations? I warned Quentin, but you both dismissed my words as the grumbling of an old man. I turned to my son. All the time you were avoiding me, considering me a burden, I was quietly covering up your mistakes. I used my connections to divert the inspector's attention away from you. And even now, upon learning of the new investigation, I asked Rod to postpone the review of Elma's case. Quentin looked stunned. You did that? Why? Because you're my son, I replied simply. No matter what. Silence hung in the room. Elma sat motionless, her red hair almost fiery in the lamplight, but her face was white as chalk. What happens next? She finally asked, and there was no longer any superiority or sarcasm in her voice, only fear. With the investigation, I clarified, Rod was able to delay it for a month using one of the old bureaucratic tricks. But Fenton is not one to give up easily. He will want to see this through to the end. And what does that mean for me? In the worst case, revocation of citizenship and deportation, I said without malice, simply stating the facts. Although, given the length of your marriage and the fact that you have children who are citizens by birth, it will most likely be a fine and a stern warning, but that's assuming all other aspects of your case are in perfect order. Quentin clutched his head. God, why didn't you tell us it was so serious? I did, I reminded him. Many times. But you thought I was just nitpicking, that it was just a formality. Elma suddenly leaned forward. Can you help? You have connections. You said so yourself. I looked at her, then at the box with the gift. I can. But why? According to your logic, old people belong in nursing homes, not in the affairs of young families. So my problems are in Sunny Harbor, and yours are here. It was a harsh response, but after all the years of neglect, after this attempt to send me to a nursing home, as if I were useless, I felt I was entitled to a little revenge. Elma turned even paler, if that was possible. Quentin looked devastated. Dad, he began. What? I interrupted. Are you kidding? Is that what you meant to say? Or maybe you really think that a 72-year-old man, fully capable and healthy, belongs in a nursing home just because his daughter-in-law doesn't like him being in her life. Quentin lowered his head, unable to find an answer. Elma looked at me with hatred mixed with fear. Her career, her status, perhaps even her right to remain in the country, all of that now depended on the man she had just tried to humiliate and throw out of the family's life. What do you want? She finally asked. For us to apologize? To take back the gift? I want respect, I replied. Not because I can help with your paperwork, but because I am Quentin's father and your children's grandfather. Because I am a man who deserves dignity, not ridicule and attempts to get rid of him. I got up from the table, taking my jacket from the back of the chair. And now I think I'll go home. To my home, not to Sunny Harbor, and I'll wait for you to decide if you really want my help, or if you'd rather manage on your own. Quentin followed me. Dad, please don't leave like this. Let's talk. We've already talked, I said, and you've made your position very clear. Now it's my turn. I headed for the door, but stopped at the stairs. Hazel, Ted, Grandpa is leaving. Come down and say goodbye. The children appeared on the top landing, clearly upset. They slowly descended the stairs, not looking at their parents. Will you come back? Ted asked quietly. I knelt down and looked him in the eyes. Of course I will. You are my grandchildren, and I love you very much. Even if Mom and Dad are being mean? Hazel asked, surprising me with her insight. Even then, I smiled. Family is family, even when we're angry with each other. I hugged them both, feeling their little arms wrap around my neck. At that moment, I realized that I couldn't completely sever ties with Quentin and Alma, no matter how much they hurt me. For the sake of my grandchildren, I had to find a way to maintain the relationship. Getting up, I nodded to Quentin. Call me when you're ready to talk seriously about Alma's documents and how we're going to build our relationship going forward. He nodded silently, unable to find the words. Alma stood in the dining room doorway with her arms crossed over her chest. Her face was impenetrable, but her eyes betrayed her fear. For the first time in all the years I had known her, I saw genuine anxiety in her eyes rather than arrogance or irritation. Harlow, she said quietly, is this the same Rod Harlow who is now Fenton's deputy? Yes, I confirmed. We've worked together for almost 20 years. He's my friend. And he really postponed the review of my case. For a month, I nodded, but it's a temporary measure. Fenton is serious. She swallowed. What should we do? You? Decide if you want my help, I replied. Me? Go home and think about whether I should offer it. With that, I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind me, in the lighted doorway, stood Quentin and Elma, confused and frightened. And between them, the children, who didn't fully understand what was happening, but sensed that the adult world had just been turned upside down. As I got into the car, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I felt satisfaction that I had managed to stand up for myself and show Elma and Quentin that I could not be treated like a disposable object. On the other hand, I felt the weight of the realization that our relationship would now change forever, and it was unclear in what direction. But one thing I knew for sure, whatever my next steps might be, they would be dictated not by revenge but by concern for my son and grandchildren, even if that meant helping Elma, who had just tried to send me to a nursing home. As I started the engine, I took one last look at the house. Quentin was still standing in the doorway, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Fear? Hope? Perhaps all of the above. I nodded to him and drove away, heading home, where silence, memories, and decisions to be made awaited me. 3 days after the ill-fated birthday passed in silence, I received no calls or messages from Quentin or Elma. Part of me expected an immediate reaction. Panic, attempts to make amends, pleas for help. But apparently they needed time to understand the situation and decide how to proceed. I didn't rush things. Returning home that evening left me with mixed feelings. Satisfaction that I had been able to fight back was mixed with bitterness at the realization of the depth of the gulf between me and my son. Plus, there was that ridiculous box of nursing home brochures that I had taken with me for some reason. On the morning of the fourth day, as I was having breakfast in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. There could only be one person visiting so early, a courier or Quentin. I guessed it was the latter, and I was right. My son stood on the doorstep, rumpled and sleep-deprived, with dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing the same sweater he had on the day we met, as if he hadn't changed his clothes in all those days. He nervously fiddled with his car keys. "Dad," he began without greeting me, "we need to talk." I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. We went into the kitchen, where my half-finished cup of coffee and uneaten toast were still on the table. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, knowing that Quentin, like me, couldn't function properly without his morning dose of caffeine. He nodded, and I got a second cup. We were silent while the coffee was brewing. I wasn't going to start this conversation. The initiative had to come from him. Finally, after getting his cup and taking his first sip, Quentin spoke up. "Is it true, what you said about the audit in Elma's documents?" "Every word," I confirmed. "Fenton has indeed started a major audit, and Alma's case is indeed in the first batch. And yes, I did ask Rod to postpone the review for a month." Quentin ran his hand over his face. "God, why didn't you tell us earlier?" "Would you have listened?" I asked without reproach, simply stating a fact. In recent years, any comment I made about Elma's documents was perceived as an attempt to control her or a sign of mistrust. He lowered his eyes, acknowledging that I was right. "What happens now?" There was alarm in his voice. "Elma is beside herself. She can't." "Elma always said that her friends, who also married Americans, don't follow all these formalities and everything is fine with them," Quentin continued. I believed her. It seemed that the rules were created to complicate life, not out of real necessity. "Most rules do exist simply for the sake of order," I agreed. "And that gift was a cruel joke. Elma suggested it as a way." He hesitated. "A way to get rid of me." I finished for him. "No," he protested, but then gave in. "Yes, partly. She thought you were interfering too much in our lives, that your constant reminders about paperwork and rules were a way to control us." "And you agreed with her," I said. "It wasn't a question. I I just wanted peace in the family." He looked ashamed. "Elma was unhappy when I insisted on maintaining a relationship with you. She said you didn't accept her, that you looked down on her." I sighed. Of course, that's how it looked from her point of view. My warnings about the need to comply with immigration laws were perceived as nitpicking, as a way of emphasizing her foreignness. "I never had anything against Elma as a person," I finally said. "My warnings were only about her documents, because I knew that sooner or later it could become a problem." Quentin looked at me with a pained expression. I know now. And I'm ashamed that it took the real threat of deportation for me to understand that. "Don't dramatize it," I shook my head. "Deportation is a last resort. Given the circumstances, it will most likely be a fine and a warning. But to do that, we need to get all the other aspects of her case in order." "How do we do that?" Hope appeared in Quentin's voice. I got up and went to the secretary in the living room. Opening one of the drawers, I took out a familiar folder labeled Elma Rand Campbell and returned to the kitchen. "Here." I placed the folder in front of my son. "Here are copies of all of Elma's documents that I've managed to collect over the years, and my notes on what needs to be corrected." Quentin opened the folder suspiciously. "You've been keeping a file on my wife all this time?" "Not a file," I corrected him. "Insurance, in case something went wrong. Like now." He leafed through the documents, pausing at my notes in red ink. "Missed interview. No proof of address. No work permit." "God, are these all serious violations?" he asked, turning pale. "Individually, no," I shook my head. "But together they paint a picture of someone who disregards the rules. And that's exactly what Fenton is looking for." "What can we do?" "First, find explanations for each violation. I sat down next to him and began reviewing the documents with him. For example, the missed interview can be explained by pregnancy. We have medical records confirming that Elma was 7 months pregnant at the time, and the doctor did not recommend long trips. Quentin nodded, listening intently. Second, we need to urgently apply for a work permit. It's impossible to do it retroactively, but at least from now on, everything must be done according to the rules. What about the lack of proof of address? He pointed to the relevant note. That's the easiest part, I shrugged. You need to collect utility bills, bank statements, any official documents with your address from the last 5 years. The more, the better. We spent the next hour making a plan of action for each point. Quentin took notes, asked questions, gradually immersing himself in the legal intricacies that he had previously considered empty formalities. When we were done, he leaned back in his chair, looking both exhausted and relieved. Thanks, Dad. I don't know what we would have done without your help. Probably hired an expensive immigration lawyer. I smiled weakly. He looked at me seriously. That's not all I mean. I mean that you continue to help us, despite how we treated you. You're my son, Quentin, I said simply, despite everything that happened between us. Tears welled up in his eyes and he quickly turned away, hiding his emotions. About that gift, he began. Let's just forget about it, I interrupted. It was a stupid, cruel joke, but I'm not going to hold a grudge against you forever. No, I want to explain, he insisted. It was Elma's idea, yes, but I should have stopped her. Instead, I let it happen because part of me was angry with you, because you were always right, because you warned us about problems with the documents, and we didn't listen, because your constant presence reminded me of my mistakes. I listened silently to his confession, realizing that behind these words lay a deep inner struggle. That still doesn't justify what we did, he concluded, and I want to apologize, truly. I put my hand on his shoulder. I accept your apology, Quentin, but there's one condition. What is it? He tensed. You have to start thinking for yourself, I said seriously. Don't let Elma or anyone else make decisions for you, especially ones that affect our family. He nodded. I promise, and I want you to know that the kids miss you, especially Hazel. She keeps asking when Grandpa's coming to visit again. Thoughts of my grandchildren warmed my heart. I miss them too. Maybe they could stay with me next weekend? If Elma doesn't mind, of course. I'll talk to her. Quentin nodded, gathering the documents back into the folder. But I don't think she'll object. After that evening, she changed. Changed? I raised an eyebrow. She's scared, he explained. I've never seen her like this before. She's usually confident, always knows what to do. Now she constantly checks her email and flinches at every phone call. Yesterday, she burst into tears when they showed a report on deportations on TV. I felt a pang of regret. Despite all our differences, I didn't want Elma to suffer, especially considering that her fears were exaggerated. Listen, I looked my son in the eyes. Tell her that it's not as bad as she thinks. Yes, there will be an inspection. Yes, there may be trouble. But if we prepare properly, the worst that can happen is a fine. Are you sure? There was hope in his eyes. Almost. I didn't want to give a 100% guarantee. There's always room for surprises in immigration law. But I know the system. I know the people. And I'm on your side. Quentin stood up, ready to leave. Thanks, Dad. I'll tell Elma everything you said, and we'll start gathering the documents today. I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he unexpectedly hugged me, for the first time in many years. The hug was awkward, but sincere. Dad, he said quietly, I'm really sorry about everything. I know, son, I replied. Me too. After he left, I sat in my chair for a long time, trying to sort out my feelings. Relief that the first step toward reconciliation had been taken. Anxiety about the upcoming review of Elma's documents. Hope that our relationship with our son could be restored. And somewhere deep down, a quiet sadness that it took the threat of deportation for him to finally hear me. In the evening, Rod Harlow called. Perry, I have news, and it's not very good. I tensed up. What happened? Fenton has discovered a delay in your daughter-in-law's case, Rod said, his voice sounding concerned. He didn't buy the 97 protocol. He said it was an outdated procedure and demanded that the case be returned to active processing immediately. I gripped the phone tighter. How soon will the review begin? The notification has already been sent, Rod replied. They'll receive it in the next few days. By regular mail. I cursed silently. Quentin was just beginning to realize the seriousness of the situation, and there was no time left to prepare. What kind of investigation is it? I asked, trying to assess the scale of the problem. Full, Rod sighed. Entry history, all status extensions, marriage verification, employment history. Fenton personally added a clause about business verification. It seems he knows or suspects that Elma was working without a permit. This was worse than I had expected. Not just a formal check, but a thorough investigation. Who was the lead inspector on the case? This question was critically important. The outcome of the case often depended on the personality of the inspector. Linda Price, Rod replied. I relaxed a little. Linda was a strict but fair inspector. We had worked together several times, and I knew she wouldn't deliberately look for problems where they could be avoided. That's a little encouraging, I said. Will they have time to prepare for the interview? The standard 2 weeks from the date of notification, Rod replied. But Perry, there's something else. Fenton personally requested all the cases where I used deferrals in recent months. He's looking for a pattern, trying to figure out if I'm covering for someone. I understood what that meant. Rod was risking his career by helping me. Listen, I said seriously, if they ask you directly, don't lie. Say that I asked for a favor for my family. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. Don't worry about me, he waved it off. I can still get out of this. But your people need to be ready. Fenton is serious, and he's not the type to easily forgive violations, even minor ones. After the conversation, I immediately called Quentin, but got his voicemail. I left a message asking him to call back as soon as possible. Then I sat down at the computer and began to draw up a detailed plan of action. What needed to be done before the interview, what documents to collect, how to explain each violation. Time was working against us. Elma had already received the notification or would receive it in the coming days. They would have only 2 weeks to prepare for the interview that could determine her future in this country. I worked late, recalling all the intricacies of immigration law, all the possible loopholes and exceptions. 30 years of experience had to come in handy now, when my son's family's future was at stake. Around midnight, Quentin called, his voice trembling with excitement. Dad, we got a letter from the Immigration Service. We're being called in for an interview in 2 weeks. What should we do? Calm down, I said, trying to sound more confident than I actually felt. I already know about this and am working on a plan. Come over tomorrow and we'll get ready. Elma is panicking, he continued. She says that if she is deported, she will lose her children. That won't happen, I assured him. Even in the worst-case scenario, you'll have time to file an appeal and find other ways to legalize your status. But it won't come to that if we prepare properly. Are you sure? His voice sounded childishly trusting, something I hadn't heard in many years. I'll do everything I can, I promised. Now go calm your wife down and try to get some sleep. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. After the conversation, I sat at the table for a long time, looking at the documents spread out in front of me. The situation was more serious than I had initially thought. Fenton clearly knew more than he should have about Alma's violations. Perhaps he had an informant among her acquaintances, or perhaps he simply possessed the same intuition that I once had, sensing where to look for problems. In any case, we had a difficult battle ahead of us, and I was ready to fight it, despite all the resentment and disagreements, because in the end, we were family. Imperfect, complicated, sometimes toxic, but family. Before going to sleep, I approached the photo of Janice on the bedside table. What would you say now, dear? I asked quietly. That everything will work out? That family is more important than resentments? You would probably be right, as always. I touched her smiling face in the photo with my fingers. I'll help them, I promise. For you, for the grandchildren, for our son. Even if it means working with Alma again, who wanted to send me to Sunny Harbor. That night I slept restlessly, but with the feeling that, despite all the difficulties, we had a chance. A chance not only to solve the problem with Elma's documents, but also to restore family ties that seemed irretrievably lost. The following week turned into a marathon of preparation for Elma's interview. Every day, Quentin brought new documents, bank statements, tax returns, children's birth certificates, letters from friends and neighbors confirming the authenticity of their marriage. My dining table became the headquarters for the operation to save Elma's status. Elma herself arrived only on the third day, with obvious reluctance and poorly concealed discomfort. Her red hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and her face, usually flawlessly made up, looked pale and tired. It was the first time I had seen her without her mask of confidence and superiority. "Hello, Perry," she said quietly as she crossed the threshold of my house. "Thank you for agreeing to help." "Elma," I nodded, trying not to show either triumph or malice. "Come in. We have a lot of work to do." The three of us sat at the table, going over every aspect of her immigration history, preparing answers to the inspector's possible questions. "They'll ask why you missed the mandatory interviews," I said, looking at the dates on the documents. "What will you say?" Elma nodded, listening intently. Her attitude toward me had changed noticeably. The hostility had disappeared, giving way to the nervous attentiveness of a student before a strict teacher. We spent several days on this exercise. Elma began to come alone while Quentin was busy with their business. Gradually, the atmosphere between us became less tense, though not friendly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one of those days when we finished rehearsing the inspector's possible questions. "After what I did," I looked her in the eyes. "Because you are the mother of my grandchildren, the wife of my son. Whether I like it or not, we are family." She lowered her gaze. "I never thought I would find myself in this situation. I always thought I was smarter than the system." "No one is smarter than the system," I remarked. "You can only learn to play by its rules to find flexibility within the law." The day before the interview, I decided it was time to dot the I's and cross the T's. I invited Quentin and Alma over for a serious talk. They arrived in the evening, leaving the children with a neighbor. We sat in the living room, they on the sofa, me in my favorite armchair. On the table between us were cups of tea that no one touched. "Tomorrow is an important day," I began. "I've done everything I can to prepare you for the interview, but there are things we need to discuss before that." They looked at me warily, as if expecting a catch. "I'm helping you not to get something in return," I continued, "but I need guarantees that our relationship will change, that there will be no more attempts to remove me from my family, from my grandchildren, from your life." Quentin nodded. "Of course, Dad. I already told you I'm sorry for—" "Let me finish," I interrupted him gently but firmly. "I'm not talking about apologies. I'm talking about specific changes. First, no more talk of nursing homes or other ways of taking care of me without my direct involvement in the decision." "That's fair," Quentin agreed. Elma was silent, but I could see her clenching her hands on her lap. "Second, I want to see my grandchildren regularly, not just on big holidays, but to really be involved in their lives." "The children will be happy," Elma finally said, "especially Hazel. She misses you." I nodded, accepting her words. "And one last thing. I've decided to go back to work." They both looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean?" Quentin asked. "Do you want to go back to immigration?" "No," I shook my head. "I'm going to work as an independent immigration consultant, helping people with their paperwork, preparing them for interviews, appealing decisions. I have the experience, knowledge, and connections. And as the situation with Elma has shown, there is a need for this." Elma sat up straight, looking at me with a new expression, a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You're going to advise immigrants after so many years of working on the other side?" "I've always been on the side of the law, not against anyone," I replied. "And yes, I want to help people navigate a system that I know better than most." "That's unexpected," Quentin said, "but I think it's a good idea. You always said you missed working." I nodded. "This situation with you made me realize that I can still be useful, that my experience shouldn't go to waste." "Who will your clients be?" Elma asked with the practicality that had always been part of her character. "To start with, friends and acquaintances of your friend," I replied. "I'm sure there are people in your circle who have immigration issues. Then if all goes well, I may expand my activities." "I have a friend, Natalie," Elma said unexpectedly. "She's in a similar situation. If my case ends well, I could recommend her to you." It was the first time she had offered me help, even in this form. It was a small but significant gesture. "I'd appreciate that," I nodded. "But let's deal with your case first." We continued to discuss the details of the upcoming interview, but the atmosphere had already changed. There was something in the air that hadn't been there before. Mutual respect, albeit cautious. As they were leaving, Elma paused at the door. "Perry," she said quietly when Quentin was already at the car, "I know we'll never be close, but I want you to know that I appreciate your help, and I'll try to be better for the kids and for Quentin." It wasn't a full apology, but for Elma, with her pride, it was a significant step. I nodded, accepting her words. "Good luck tomorrow. Remember everything we discussed and be as honest as possible." The next day I was restless, waiting for news. The interview was scheduled for 11 in the morning, but the process could take several hours. I tried to distract myself by working on a business plan for my consulting practice, but my thoughts kept returning to Elma and Quentin, sitting in front of the stern inspector Linda Price. Around 3 o'clock, I got a call from Quentin. I grabbed the phone without even saying hello. "How did it go?" "Better than we expected." My son's voice sounded relieved. "The inspector was strict but fair. She asked exactly the questions you prepared us for." "How did Elma do?" I asked, knowing that her nervousness could have ruined everything. "She did great," Quentin said proudly. "She calmly explained all the violations, admitted her mistakes, and didn't try to wriggle out of it." The inspector appreciated that. "And what was the result?" "The official response will be in 2 weeks," Quentin said. But the inspector hinted that it will most likely be limited to a warning and a fine. No deportation. I breathed a sigh of relief. The situation, which had seemed catastrophic a week ago, now looked quite manageable. "That's great news," I said. "Where are you now?" "We're on our way home," he replied. "Elma is exhausted and needs to rest. But we'd like to invite you to dinner on Saturday, to celebrate and start over if you agree." I smiled. "Of course I agree. What time?" We agreed on the details and I hung up, feeling a strange satisfaction. Not a triumph over Elma, not schadenfreude that they had become dependent on my help. Just a quiet joy that a family that had seemed hopelessly divided was beginning to find its way back together. I spent the remaining days until Saturday preparing for a new chapter in my life. I contacted old colleagues, learned about current trends in immigration policy, and compiled a list of services I could offer as a consultant. The call to Sheila Brooke was particularly important. I invited her to that very tea with whiskey she had suggested when we met at the supermarket. We met at her cozy house on Maple Street, a small but tastefully furnished cottage where every item had its own history and purpose, just like the hostess herself. "So Perry Campbell is back in the game?" she asked, pouring whiskey into glasses. "As a consultant for immigrants? Ironic, don't you think?" "Life is full of irony," I smiled, accepting a glass. "But I always tried to be fair, even when I was working for the service. Now I'll just be helping people from the other side." "And what led to that decision?" Sheila settled into the chair opposite me, watching me intently. I told her about the situation with Alma, about the birthday gift, about how I helped them prepare for the interview. I didn't go into personal details, but I gave her enough to understand the context. "And you decided you could do this professionally?" she asked when I finished. "Why not?" I shrugged. "I have the knowledge, the experience, the connections, and as it turns out, I can still be useful." Sheila thoughtfully twirled her glass in her hands. "You know, that's not such a bad idea. I sometimes consult on document verification myself. Unofficially, of course." "Really?" I was surprised. "And how's that going?" "Not bad," she smiled. "It turns out that 30 years of working with documents makes you a pretty valuable specialist." We talked about opportunities for cooperation, about how we could combine our efforts. Sheila, with her expertise in verifying the authenticity of documents, would perfectly complement my knowledge of immigration law and procedures. "We could become partners," she suggested at one point. "Campbell and Brooke, immigration consultants." "Sounds good, doesn't it?" I smiled, imagining the two of us working together in a small but cozy office. "Sounds great." As I was leaving, Sheila walked me to the door. "You know, Perry, I always thought you retired too early. You're not the type to sit around doing nothing." "You're right," I admitted. "I just needed a push to realize it." She squeezed my hand goodbye. "Call me next week. We'll discuss the details of our partnership." On my way home, I felt the energy I had been lacking so much in recent years filling me up again. My plan for a new life was beginning to take shape. A consulting business with Sheila, a restored relationship with my son and grandchildren, a new purpose and meaning. On Saturday, I arrived at Quentin and Alma's house feeling different than I had the last time. Not as an unwelcome guest or a burden they wanted to get rid of, but as a person who had rediscovered his place in life and in the family. The house looked different, less sterile, more alive. New photos had appeared on the walls, including several with me in them. The children greeted me with sincere joy, especially Hazel, who immediately dragged me off to show me her new rock collection. Dinner took place in a warm, almost relaxed atmosphere. Elma was reserved but polite. Quentin was open and attentive. We talked about my plans to start a consulting business, the children's successes at school, and the possibility of spending a weekend together outside the city. After dinner, when the children had gone to watch a movie, Quentin poured wine for the three of us. "A toast," he said, raising his glass, "to new beginnings." We drank, and I felt something change in the air. Not complete reconciliation, but the beginning of a new phase in our relationship, based on mutual respect rather than resentment and manipulation. "By the way," said Elma, putting her glass on the table, "I spoke with Natalia. She would like to consult with you about extending her residence permit, if your offer is still valid." "Of course," I nodded. "I'll be happy to help. And also," she paused for a moment, "I threw away all the Sun Harbor brochures. It was unworthy of me." It was the closest thing to an apology I could expect from Alma. I accepted it with a nod. "All right, consider the incident resolved." Later, when I was leaving to go home, Quentin walked me to my car. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly, "for everything." "You're welcome," I replied. "Just don't lose touch again." He nodded and we hugged, genuinely, without awkwardness or tension. At home, I sat down in my favorite chair, looking at a photo of Janice. "You would have been proud of me today," I said quietly. I didn't let resentment destroy our family. And I found a new path, a new goal. The following week, Sheila and I rented a small office near downtown Tigard. It was a modest space with 2 desks, computers, and a small reception area for clients. A sign appeared on the door. "Campbell and Brooke, immigration consultants." Natalia, Elma's friend, became our first official client. Others followed, first from Elma's circle of acquaintances, then through referrals, then from the immigrant community, which quickly learned about the former immigration officer now helping from the other side. I found that the work brought me much more satisfaction than I had expected. Every case resolved, every family that avoided separation, thanks to correctly completed documents, gave me a sense of purpose and meaning that I had been lacking since retiring. My relationship with Sheila also developed, first as a business partnership, then as a friendship, and then time will tell. At 72, I was in no hurry to make romantic commitments, but I enjoyed her company, her sharp mind, and her unexpected sense of humor. Quentin, his family, and I had found a new balance. I saw my grandchildren regularly, and sometimes they stayed with me for the weekend. Elma still kept her distance a little, but without the hostility she had shown before. She even recommended our consulting services to her business community, which led to several corporate clients. Sometimes, sitting in my armchair in the evening after a busy day at work, I would remember that gift, the box of documents from the nursing home that was supposed to be my final resting place, a place where I would not interfere with the young people living their lives. Life had other plans. Instead of quietly fading away in Sunny Harbor, I found a new purpose, new relationships, and a new meaning to my existence. And even though it happened through conflict and pain, the result was worth it. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to punish Elma and Quentin for what they did. I simply regained control of my life, showing that at 72, a person can still be useful, respected, and independent. At the Immigration Service, I learned one important thing. Every document, every visa, every status is not just a piece of paper. Behind them are human destinies, families, hopes. Now I use this knowledge differently, not for verification and control, but for help and support. And this, perhaps, was the main lesson of this whole story. It is never too late to change direction, find a new path, start over. Even when your closest friends and family have already written you off and prepared a box of brochures for a nursing home as a gift for your birthday.